My name is Sukaja. Welcome to another booktube video. I'm going to talk to you about my opinion of Stephen King and his books. So I've always been curious about Stephen King and the kind of books that he writes, but I've never really read any of his books up until now. As an English major, there was always this mindset that, Stephen King's books aren't really, what qualify as some really good literature. So I decided to challenge that view of late, and I've always wanted to check out, what kind of books he writes because he's such a phenomenon. He's like a sensation. People all over the world know his names. He's written about books, maybe 500. I'm not even sure. If you know, please comment down below. So he's written so much. That means he's definitely got a lot of imagination. So I want to talk about in this video how I converted myself into a horror fan by reading Stephen King. And I did take some YouTubers' advice on how to get into Stephen King novels, and if you're somebody who'd like to do the same thing, then I recommend following this reading path, which I'm going to talk to you about in this video. Without further ado, let's get started. So the first book I read by Stephen King was Carrie, and I have reviewed that on the channel before. I'm going to be linking it here so that you can go and take a look of my video review of the novel. So Carrie is basically about a high school girl. That was his debut novel, so it's like a chronological path which I've taken, delving deep into Stephen King's works. What happens with Stephen King, I've noticed, is that he kind of gets you into his world, and once you're into his world and his characters, you don't really want to get out. And once you get out of every book that you've read by him, you have this bookish hangover, and then you have this craving that you want to read more. That's just what he does. And what I also loved is his cliffhangers. I've noticed this in all his 3 books that I've read, 5 books that I've read, including Cycle of the Werewolf, which was a graphic novel by Stephen King, which I reviewed in my previous videos. I'm going to link that up here as well or down below. So do check it out if you're interested in, just getting a taste of Stephen King. I'm also planning to read one other book by him. So I have converted into a Stephen King fan in the last 2 weeks. All these books, I think you can read them back to back because they are so engrossing. The first book I read was Salem's Lot, which is, I think, his second book that he wrote after Carrie. Correct me if I'm wrong. Salem's Lot is perfect for all of you vampire lovers out there. I am not a vampire fan, but then I thought this is, safe territory. It's not something that's going to really scare me out of my wits because I am 100% sure vampires do not exist in real life. But then when I did read this book, I have been thinking about it for the past 2 weeks, even though I read this 2 weeks ago. And I have had ideas of vampires when I'm in my room sleeping at night, that they're scratching on the windowsill outside and I'm, about to be attacked by a vampire. How he gets you to believe in things that don't exist, now that is amazing. In this book, it starts off slow. You are introduced to a flurry of characters. Initially, the first 100 pages are slow because you are getting introduced to so many different characters, but they're all very important because they do feature again and again in the rest of the pages of this novel. Normally, I stay away from thick books, but then with Stephen King, you need the book to be thick to really enjoy it. I didn't enjoy Carrie as much because Carrie is actually a thin book and I needed more substance, and it just didn't really work for me. So that was a 3-star read for me. But then this book is by far, I think, the favorite that I've read in the last 2 weeks of all of Stephen King's that I've read. Coming back to this story. So the first 100 pages, you have to meet a lot of characters and all of them are important, so do take note. And it's all about world building and setting the tone for what's about to happen. So there's this place called Salem's Lot, which is in Maine. Most of Stephen King's novels are set in Massachusetts, Maine. And I love the fact that he uses the countryside, and the fact that the countryside is so sparsely populated, and it doesn't have accessibility to a lot of things. So there is a chance that people will encounter strange things in the countryside and cry for help, but then there's nobody really there to help you. And the characters in the countryside are also not your mainstream regular people that you meet in the city. All of them have their quirks, and I just think the setting works really well in all of Stephen King's books. First of all, let's get back to Salem's Lot. I seem to be drifting because I'm such a big fan now. I have been Googling all about Stephen King ever since I read all these 3 books. So anyway, going back to this is a very convincing vampire tale. Now, I haven't read Dracula, but this book made me want to go and pick up Bram Stoker's Dracula right after. Right? So that's the quality of this work. So yeah, just bear with it for the first 100 pages and then you will start seeing things happen really, really quickly. And you will start seeing how, people are victimized by this vampire. So there's this house and it is on a hill and it's a forbidden place. It's known to be haunted. And everybody in this town, which is Salem's Lot, is aware that this house is no good, right? And then suddenly there's a new tenant in that house and he's an antique stealer. and he's got this weird accent, hint hint, vampires, right? Then he's infiltrating the town and its people. So as a reader, you do know what's going to happen. You know that this person is related and connected to vampires. So you're just waiting for things to unfold as you read this book. And I thought that was just brilliant how he did that. I found this very similar to Cycle of the Werewolves, because in Cycle of the Werewolves as well, you are introduced to a flurry of characters, many of whom become victims. And there is one character who's a little boy who becomes kind of able to kind of defeat the evil, which I think Stephen King does really well when it comes to children protagonists. So there's one child protagonist here as well who kind of is empowered and is able to kind of take on the vampires regardless, which I thought was brilliant, the way that child was involved. There's also a character who's very similar to Van Helsing, who kind of is very knowledgeable about vampires and how to kill them and slay them. So all of that ties in really well. I want to read a particular paragraph that really appealed to me about the little boy. Before drifting away entirely, he found himself reflecting, not for the first time, on the peculiarity of adults. They took laxatives, liquor, or sleeping pills to drive away their terrors so that sleep would come. And their terrors were so tame and domestic. The job, the money, what the teacher will think if I can't get Jenny nicer clothes. Does my wife still love me? Who are my friends? They were pallid compared to the fears every child lies cheek and jowl with in his dark bed, with no one to confess to in hope of perfect understanding but another child. There is no group therapy or psychiatry or community social services for the child who must cope with the thing under the bed or in the cellar every night. The thing which leers and capers and threatens just beyond the point where vision will reach. The same lonely battle must be fought night after night, and the only cure is the eventual ossification of the imaginary faculties, and this is called adulthood. I thought that was brilliant. That's a piece of, what you can expect by reading this book. I hope I didn't give any spoilers away, but the resolution is brilliant. I loved how it ended. It really gives you like the feeling of your hairs creeping up, and you are going to be staying up at night reading this because you so badly want to know what happens. You want that, good succeeds over evil. There's not much gore in this, although other Stephen King novels are known for their gore. But this is pretty safe if you're somebody who doesn't like gore. And even if you don't like fancy vampires, I'm not crazy about Twilight, I'm not crazy about vampires, but I thought this was a great start. Maybe I should have started with this as opposed to Carrie. And this is a great introduction to Stephen King's world and, the setting of Maine and, the haunted house trope. Everything was done really well. Highly recommend this. Very atmospheric, very engrossing. This was a 4.5 star read for me. I'm giving it 0.5 stars less because the first 100 pages were a bit of a drag. But after that, the payoff was really high, so highly recommend this. The light is starting to come down, so I better not lose you guys. Next book I read is Misery by Stephen King, which introduces you to a totally different style of his writing. This isn't a very thick book, but is a perfect read if you're, again, curious about Stephen King's writing. This is, however, a little gory, so I must warn you, if you're not somebody who has an appetite for gore, do not pick this up. It's based on a very interesting premise. This is about a woman who is living by herself. She's a lonely person. She lives again in this place in Colorado, Sidewinder. She's very cut off and aloof, as is this house here. She does not have any people around her, living in the countryside again. She's a big fan of this one author, okay? And one day what happens is the author's car meets with an accident, and he is, for some reason, on the road and it's snowing, and this woman happens to be around, so she decides to pull him out of his car and take him to her house. Alright, so this is just outrageous because she does not think to even call the ambulance. And coincidentally, she's an ex-nurse, right? So she has a lot of practice when it comes to administering drugs and, medication to a person who's in need of that. So she's not totally like a stranger when it comes to those things. And what happens is she takes the writer to her house, and you know what? It just so happens that this woman is his #1 fan. So it is very, very creepy and scary. I just love how Stephen King thought of this idea and really developed it, right? For us to even come up with those kinds of ideas. I think one more thing that I loved about reading his books is that it teaches you a lot about writing. How do you tell a story? For instance, he's also a very good storyteller when you listen to him on talk shows. I just have to add that here because I did watch a lot of his talk shows. I think I'm sidelining again. Anyway, coming back to the main point, Misery. And the #1 fan is not happy with what the author here is what he's done with his recent book. So she's literally behind him to write another book, right? So she holds him captive, threatens him, blackmails him, does everything in her power to make sure he is writing and creating art under pressure. It gets very gory as well. I don't want to say more This was also made into a movie if you're interested in watching that. This is written really well, and again, a real page turner. There were no like drags, there were not many characters involved. In fact, I can say safely that this entire novel takes place within one setting, in one room, in one house, right? Or two rooms. So that's how this novel is. Highly, highly recommended. This is a different kind of horror in that this could really happen in real life, and this is something that's very close to the evil side of human beings. Explores that, and I read this right after reading Salem's Lot, and it was great. The Shining. I'm so happy with myself because I never thought I'd read The Shining ever, and I thought that being somebody who was really, really scared after watching Exorcist, I thought anything to do with possession would really scare my wits altogether. But then I read The Shining, and it wasn't so bad. I didn't actually get scared, and I think that's because I read it at my age as opposed to being, say, 20 years younger. I think it's also the moment in which you come to a novel that really affects your reading experience of that novel. So The Shining is, I think, Stephen King's third novel. I wouldn't say it's a good introduction to his works. I think you have to go in the order that I mentioned to really get a taste of Stephen King's works. Don't start with The Shining because it might not really like give you what you need, because it's a slow burn. It's a very slow novel. It's not something that's really a page turner. It's not something that will be read in 2 days. You're gonna have to take your time with it. If you like The Haunting of Hill House and Shirley Jackson's novels, I think you will like The Shining. So it's set in a hotel, again in Sidewinder, Colorado, and this hotel is basically got a lot of evil in it, and it takes the trope of hotels where, you know, as places where a lot of people and individuals have come and gone. Many of them have done questionable things, many of them are evil, so you know, all that evil stays in the hotel and the hotel becomes possessed by that evil. So that's what it's about. It's a classic ghost story. It's executed really, really well. This was also made into a film. I think Stephen King wrote the screenplay for this film, but later that screenplay was rejected. He also said in one of his interviews his screenplay writing is harder than novel writing. I'm not so sure, but I'm giving you some facts here because I did a lot of research after reading these books. I wouldn't say it keeps your hair on edge because there's not really one individual ghost or one particular thing that you can focus your scare on. There's multiple things that are spooky and creepy, and I'm not saying just the creak of a floorboard. That's not what I'm talking about. There's a lot of psychological thing that's happening at play, and our narrator is like 5 years old. So that the 5-year-old kid, his name is Danny, and he's the main character of this novel. That was the one thing that I felt like I couldn't rate this book 5 stars for, because this kid is just way too young. Even if he's a prodigy, he's way too young to have like these kind of thoughts to possess, you know, at that age. And apparently he's somebody who can communicate and see things. He's a telepath. He can read people's thoughts. He can read his dad's thoughts, read his mom's thoughts as well. So he's very sensitive to his surroundings, and that's what The Shine is. The fact that Danny has these powers, these are ESP powers. This book had a great end, and the last 100 pages were page turners. So I couldn't put the book down. I was telling my husband, I need like 15 minutes to finish this right here, right now, because it was so good. That was The Shining. I think of all the 3 books that I've read, I would rate Salem's Lot first, then Misery, then I would rate The Shining, then I would rate Cycle of the Werewolves, last I would rate Carrie. So that's 5 Stephen Kings for you. I'm also going to read his short stories next with Night Shift. I think that's the better of his short story collections. Very excited to read that, and I will be back with a review of that as well. Interestingly, even though February is like the start of spring here and it is like getting warmer here, I have been on this road where I have just wanted to read a lot of horror and really dip my toes into Stephen King's worlds and his works. Now, if you've read any of his books and you have recommendations for me, I would love to know where I should go next after Night Shift. If you're a really big Stephen King's fan, I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts were about all these books. Please do share them in the comment section down below and let's have a chat. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and do consider subscribing to my channel. I will be back with more bookish videos soon. In the meantime, stay safe, stay sane. Bye.